of modern development, and basically.
But it wasn't. I mean,
it wasn't happening
yet. It was aspiring to that.
That's right, and people were. Well, people were starting to think possibly maybe in the future we're going to own a car, but not like today. It seems everyone has a car.
Right, no, I don't even think people thought about that because they were making 600 RMB a
That's
month.
True. That's true.
They were not exactly thinking about buying a car.
It must be a very difficult decision-making process.
Well, frankly, it was the leader of General Motors, Jack Smith, who had the vision that yes, this market would become something. Because frankly, a lot of my colleagues in Detroit said, what? They make, well, I don't know, maybe $600-700 a year. Who's going to, or $1,000 a year? Who's going to ever buy a car? Forget it. You're wasting your time trying to open that market. Maybe it'll open in 20 years, but not now. Okay. So our working at that time to get this project was, a matter of really understanding the Chinese vision, which is a part of diplomacy, meaning what is the other person thinking? And we understood by talking to the various government leaders that really they had this vision of building a modern auto industry. Now, actually, we originally didn't realize that. And we had this, we thought, brilliant idea, which was we're going to bring a current plant that was in existence in America and bring that to China, which would be 15 years ahead of what China had. But it would be paid off, it would be inexpensive, it would be tried and true, no risk. You'd know exactly what to do. You could get started right away. So we proposed this to the Chinese, and the Chinese said, well, then we'll always be 5 or 7 years behind everybody. We don't want that. We want to be in the front of the class, not in the back of the class. So when we heard that, even though economically our original idea was a good idea, cheap, fast, well tested, the Chinese, that was not their aspiration. So we listened to that, and we understood what they wanted to do was to build a modern auto industry. So our strategy became not just come in, be a leader, make a lot of money, but let's help China build a modern auto industry. So what did that mean? That meant you had to bring the right technology, you had to help figure out how to train people, you had to bring in all the right processing, you had to work slowly to build the infrastructure to build a modern industry as opposed to putting up a plant quick and getting sales out.
Well, when you talk about this story now, it seems straightforward. But what was most difficult at the time?
Well, I mean, first of all, that's not the way American businessmen thought at that time. So there were a lot of people who said, well, just, give them something that they can make money right away. Who doesn't want that? Well, the Chinese didn't want that, okay? Which you had to listen.
Different ways of thinking.
You had to listen to what they were saying to understand that they didn't want to just start making money in 2 years.
That's diplomacy.
Well, that is diplomacy, right?
Yeah. And were you easily accepted by your colleagues at the time back in America?
Well, I've said, one of the characteristics of my life is I've been an outsider all my life trying to become an insider.
What do you mean by that?
And what I mean is that I didn't come from inside that culture. So I was, just as you say, I wasn't the guy, which all the General Motors people were. I wasn't white, okay, the way they were. I didn't come from Middle West, which most of them did. I mean, they couldn't even get over, you live in Manhattan? How is that possible? Okay? So in every way, I was an outsider. So when I look back and I say, what was probably the greatest compliment I got from somebody at General Motors? It was not, oh, you're smart, or you got great ideas, or you did a great project. It was, I was at one day I was drinking coffee with somebody I was meeting with, 7:30 in the morning, which is another culture shock, because in New York, we start work at 9:30 and my commute is 15 minutes. In General Motors, you have to drive maybe an hour to get to work, and it starts at 7:30, okay? It was terrible, it was dark, okay? Anyway, I was sitting with this guy, drinking a cup of coffee with him, and he gave me the biggest compliment I had while I was at General Motors. He said, you know what? You're very comfortable to work with. So I think it's the greatest compliment because it really is the basis for success. In other words, I could have the world's brightest ideas, but if he didn't feel comfortable working with me, they would never take place. So I always say, okay, to be successful, think of the 3 C's. You need to be competent, obviously. You should have good character, meaning people have to trust you, okay, that you're not just out for yourself. But the third thing is think about making the other person comfortable with you. Because if you have new ideas, it may be shaking up that person a little. And maybe it makes them uncomfortable. You've got to figure out how they can be comfortable with their new ways of thinking.
But even in those years, I mean, after a while, when people got to know you better, then they would say probably, yeah, you're comfortable to work with. But at the same time, the first impression would be, well, this is a Chinese woman. She's on top of us. Basically, she's the leader. And did you also get some strange questions, basically, when you travel in America? How come any question about just your background and questions about China, say, at the time?
No, maybe not so many people would ask, but they're thinking that. Who is this person, okay? And, like somebody from the moon, okay? Because particularly at General Motors, most of the people there had worked there for the last probably 30 years.
That's right.
So they never hired anybody from the outside, okay? They really didn't ever. Most companies do. They never did, because when I joined them, I think they had something like 600,000 employees. I mean, they didn't need to hire anybody. They were bigger than many, many countries, okay? So the fact that I came in, being who I am, I'm really like somebody from Mars, okay? So it was quite a challenge, because people had never seen, a woman from New York who's Asian. I mean, come on, okay? Our language was common, but we were culturally so distant from each other. So that was a challenge. I mean, and it really just means thinking about what the other person is thinking. That's really all. It's a fairly simple thing if you think that way. So I think, that's true in probably any probably in a marriage too, right? Collaborative activity that you need. You have to understand what's the other person want, not just what you want, right? And what you think they should want, maybe they don't want. 9% of the ads written by people trying to get voted were about how bad China was, and they were going to protect you against China. That's the way to deal with this issue, not getting into political debates or what have you, to make people feel a common humanity between each other. This gives kids an alternative. Maybe you're not so good in your math, but you dance well, you can perform well. All of a sudden, you have self-confidence, and that's hugely important.
After she retired from General Motors in 2000, Shalie was even busier, devoting herself to promoting understanding between China and the U.S. She was a founder of the Committee 100, an organization of leading Chinese Americans, and went on to establish the U.S.-China Culture Institute, which has just celebrated its 15th anniversary. Being a great lover of the arts, she believes that culture and education are the transcendental bridges between countries and peoples. Is it the lack of understanding even still true today? Because, I mean,
yes,
people would have that impression, say, we have tens of thousands of people, Chinese people, traveling to America to study, not to mention, even bigger number of tourists going between the two countries. And we have access to all these blockbusters produced in Hollywood. I mean, people will say, well, it seems we have all these channels to know each other, to understand each other. But is it not enough to you?
I'll give you a statistic, the attitudes about American people towards China are somewhat very lacking in specificity, and therefore sometimes negative. So in the last election, we just looked at some statistics. 9% of the ads written by people trying to get voted were about how bad China was, and they were going to protect you against China.
They're still doing the same thing, I mean.
The last election. This election, who knows what the number will be, but it will be at least 9%, I'm sure. Okay. So people's attitudes about China today, particularly as China rises, are not particularly favorable. Okay. So it's very important to take away the stereotypes of big, scary China that's going to come and eat us up like the big bad wolf, and take our jobs and take everything away. So I think that we just did a project with a school group from Phillips Academy, and it was a very outstanding school. They just sent about 100 kids to China in partnership with Dachong High School and Song Ying, the Children's Palace, to do a big cultural exchange project through music. Well, those kids will never think that Chinese people are bad, fearsome, trying to take over our lives, because they had a great experience here. They saw kids just like themselves, and so their attitude about China is going to be completely different. So right now they're 18 years old, okay? When they get to 25, they'll still have that attitude. So I think that overall, this kind of relationship, and the arts are the way to do it, because those touch human beings' feelings and their souls and their hearts. That's the way to deal with this issue, not getting into political debates or what have you. To make people feel a common humanity between each other.
So how do you achieve that? I mean, you bring lots of artists.
We do a lot of cultural. I think our artists are great ambassadors for us. Okay, Huang Dodo is a great example.
The dancer,
there, the dancer, and then Liao Changying, the singer, and Shen Yang. We have so many artists of all different kinds who have been ambassadors for the Chinese culture. I mean, just the fact they look Chinese. Oh, gee, that's the Chinese doing that. How wonderful. All of a sudden you don't think, those are terrible people. And you have a respect for their culture and those people. So I think that's a very important aspect. So I help develop some of the artists. I bring them to the international world, help them get there. And then I kind of promote them, etc. And then we do some group types of interactions. So I have one project I mentioned. It's called Dancing into the Future. And this is a project which uses an American form of teaching, which uses dance, not to make them ballet dancers, but teaches to give them self-confidence and teamwork and a kind of search for excellence. And this has been in America for 40 years, and it's won all the prize, National Medal of Arts, etc. And I brought this to China, to the Children's Palace in Shanghai and Minhang County. And they responded tremendously, because one problem is that in China the education system is very strong. Kids really test well, top of the world, but they have so much pressure. They really don't have a chance. If you're not good in your math and your studies, you kind of really are kind of a terrible person. So this gives kids an alternative. Maybe you're not so good in your math, but you dance well, you can perform well. All of a sudden, you have self-confidence, and that's hugely important. And you have imagination, you have freedom to be that. So that project, now we've been doing it for our 4th year, and it's in Minhang County, and it's with Children's Palace and with National Dance Institute, our organization. And we've had 6,000 children. And just 2 days ago, 3 kids who've been in this program are now, they start at 11 years old, one of them started at 15. One of them now is going to the Aeronautical Engineering College. Another one is a migrant workers kid. He's going to a high school in Wuhan, which is amazing. And another kid comes from a poor background, and he's going to the Shanghai Academy of Dance. So just from these 3 years, they lived in very tough conditions, And now all of a sudden they have a future. So it's really nice to see how they personally develop through the use of the arts.
Shalie has just celebrated her 80th birthday. She was surrounded by family, friends, and artists who couldn't stop talking about how she has helped them and their best wishes for her.
I would say the success I've made in the last 7 or 8 years, I cannot imagine without her. So she has helped me so much.
I'm so fortunate in my life to meet such a wonderful, legendary lady. She is my role model. She is not only a great friend, and she is also like a mother figure.
There's nothing else you can ask more of her. I think it's sort of, being her is already fantastic. I think she's a wonderful role model for all of us. Best wishes to Shalie, and maybe next time we'll see her in the 100th birthday.
I hope that I can use my mother, who is 109 and a half, almost 110 this year, as my role model. So I hope that I have some years ahead of me to continue this work of bringing China and the United States together through the arts.
What is your biggest wish now?
Well, I hope my wish simply is that more people will do more in China and the United States. But I also have a very important message to say when you do that, let's say from China to the United States, it's very important to involve American organizations as partners. So that's part of what I've been trying to do. So it's helpful to have an American partner because we can tell you, oh yes, the Metropolitan Museum is important to work with, and we can access New York Philharmonic or Lincoln Center or the Empire State, to bring those organizations so that they will work with you. Now, there has to be mutual benefit. I mean, they're not just going to do something because you want it.
That's
they're
right.
going to do something because it helps themselves. So, again, it takes, like diplomacy, it takes understanding what are they trying to do. So in the case, for example, at Lincoln Center and the New York Philharmonic, their goal was to expand their audience. By participating in this activity, they could reach new audiences, and plus they could reach Chinese-American audiences, which they wanted. So it's a win for both parties. You know, the Chinese side gets to present its things in a very important venue, but then the partner gets to expand what it wants to do in terms of reaching more people.
That's
so
true.
I think that the future is good, but right now we have a situation where many organizations in China have both the desire and the money to go to the West. But sometimes what happens is they go to the West and they rent the place, and especially for performances, but it ends up the audience is all black hairs. So they have not achieved the goal of impacting American society. Frankly, it's a lot harder, right, to do it with them, because then you have to find an American partner who wants to do it with you, who then will use their audience for you to show. Well, that takes partnership, which means you can't just say, this is what I want to show. No, you have to say, well, what are you trying to do? What would you like us to show? And work together so that you both benefit and both win.
Well,
and so I think that's the essence of diplomacy, right?
Exactly.
Is that both parties can win.
So in the end, you are a diplomat.
Well,
Now, this is the book written by your mother. It's 109, now 110 Springtimes, her story. It's just amazing. And you also have an amazing life. And do you also plan to write maybe a book yourself like this one?
Yes. I think that's the next step to do. First, we have to let her story get out. and the story will be in English, so it'll be published in August in English.
Yeah.
So that'll be available then. And then when we've done that, then maybe I'll think about my book.
Yeah, when that is out, hope you'll be back again in the studio.
Okay.
We can talk about your new book and more stories. Thank you once again,
Okay,
Ms.
very
Young, for
nice
coming
being with
to the studio and sharing your story. Thank you once again. Thank you for
Okay,
your time.
thank you. Nice to be here. So when we heard that, even though economically our original idea was a good idea, cheap, fast, well tested, the Chinese that was not their aspiration. So we listened to that and we understood what they wanted to do was to build a modern auto industry. So our strategy became not just come in, be a leader, make a lot of money, but let's help China build a modern auto industry. So the project was, a matter of really understanding the Chinese vision, which is a part of diplomacy, meaning what is the other person thinking? And we understood by talking to the various government leaders that really they had this vision of building a modern auto industry. Now, actually, we originally didn't realize that. And we had this, we thought, brilliant idea, which was we're going to bring a current plant that was in
Shape of modern development, and basically.
But it wasn't. I mean,
It wasn't happening
It was
yet.
aspiring to that.
That's right, and people were starting to think possibly maybe in the future we're going to own a car, but not like today. It seems everyone has a car.
No, I don't even think people thought about that because
Right.
they were making 600 RMB a
That's
month.
true. That's
They
true.
were not exactly thinking
That's
about
true.
buying a car.
It must be a very difficult decision-making process.
Well, frankly, resistance in America, and bring that to China, which would be 15 years ahead of what China had, but it would be paid off, it would be inexpensive, it would be tried and true, no risk, you'd know exactly what to do, you could get started right away. So we proposed this to the Chinese, and the Chinese said, well, then we'll always be 5 or 7 years behind everybody. We don't want that. We want to be in the front of the class, not in the back of the class. It was the leader of General Motors, Jack Smith, who had the vision that, yes, this market would become something. Because, frankly, a lot of my colleagues in Detroit said, what? They make, well, I don't know, maybe $600-700 a year. Who's going to, or $1,000 a year? Who's going to ever buy a car? Forget it. You're wasting your time trying to open that market. Maybe it'll open in 20 years, but not now. Okay. So are working at that time to get this